financial burden of caregiving is a real problem for over 55 million caregivers across the U.S. What money issues do people need to consider before they take on the caregiving role? You're listening to Heartbeat from the Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Fenter, here with Helen Bauer.
Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, we're here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care. Because we know how busy life can get, Heartbeat is designed to give you helpful information in a bite-sized format. The Heart of Hospice is partnering with end-of-life educator Barbara Carnes, author of the Little Blue Book, to present a talk at the California Hospice and Palliative Care Association Annual Conference coming up June 6th through the 10th in Orange, California. The conference theme is Back to the Basics at the Bedside and will feature talks on hospice eligibility, documentation, and a 2-day LNEC pre-conference. Visit calhospice.org to register. Be sure to tell them you heard about it on the Heart of Hospice podcast, and we'll see you there. You know why? Everything always seems to come down to money, doesn't it?
It seems to. Money kind of rules the world, it seems like.
Let's say runs the world. I like that. It's still not good, but yeah.
Yeah, you do need money to live, it seems
yes.
like.
And you need money to do caregiving.
This is very true.
Right. So that's what we're talking about today.
Right. There is a financial burden that caregivers bear.
Maybe we should say financial responsibility.
I like that.
It sounds a little bit better, but it can become a burden if it's not managed well. How about we do that?
Yeah, the reality is that it can become a burden.
Yes. So, like you said in the introduction, there are over 50 million caregivers across the United States. 50 million people
that is hard
that
to
are
imagine.
Caregivers.
Yeah, and there are many aspects of the caregiving role that need to be considered before someone takes on that responsibility of caring for a friend or a family member. Now, sometimes we don't have much time to even consider whether we want this role or not. Sometimes it's thrust upon us without any question or consideration about whether we want it or not. It's just happens.
Something acute or horrific happens.
Right. But if given time to consider that, then we need to take into consideration some things like time, availability.
Right.
What about other caregiving roles? Maybe we have kids at home. What about our own physical abilities? Are we healthy enough to take care of someone else? Our stamina. And then it comes down to distance and money.
Money. So I think a lot of times the financial part of it gets overlooked because maybe caregivers have unrealistic expectations about how much it costs.
Right.
I think that's a possibility.
I think it's very possible. People are really, I think, misinformed about resources. So let's talk about this for just a minute. Many times people think that Medicare will pay for nursing home costs, and it does not.
Right. And I've seen this a lot of times in hospice, when you have a patient at home and you say, well, I remember asking people, have you thought about when he becomes bedbound? Or, have you thought about as his disease worsens, how you will manage his care? And they would say, well, we figured we might eventually, he would outgrow what we can do here at home and he would have to live in a nursing home. And then when we talked about how they would pay for it, they thought that Medicare would cover that.
Right. Medicare does not cover that. Now, in some states, the Medicaid program might, but at that point, Medicaid only covers because the family or the person can't pay. They have no money left.
They have to qualify financially. And some states don't have Medicaid.
This is true.
To begin with.
Right.
So here's another thing that people often misunderstand, I guess. Insurance covers caregivers in the home. Health insurance.
Health insurance. Health insurance does not. Now, long-term care insurance may.
Right.
Depends on the policy.
But it is a separate policy that you would have to intentionally purchase in advance, et cetera.
Right. But your normal health care insurance will not pay for that.
No. And here's one of these hospice myths that's also a piece of information related to this. Hospice will pay for 24/7 staffing.
No, they're not going to do that.
They're not going to put someone in your home around the clock all the time.
Right. We in hospice do not provide round-the-clock caregivers.
No.
We sort of expect the family to be the caregivers for this patient, and the hospice will provide the professional caregivers who come in, like nurses, social workers, chaplains, and so forth, aides, things like that. But we do not provide around-the-clock caregivers.
Right. We're only there to supplement.
We want to tell you about the upcoming California Hospice and Palliative Care Association annual conference. The conference features a 2-day pre-conference on LNIC communication, followed by talks on leadership, quality at the bedside, and hospice length of stay. Attendees will hear speakers from NGS, CHAP, and the California Nurses Association. Helen and I are thrilled to be partnering with end-of-life educator Barbara Carnes from BK Books to talk about getting back to end-of-life basics. The LNIC pre-conference will be held on Monday and Tuesday, June 6th and 7th, followed by the annual conference on June the 8th through the 10th. This is a great educational opportunity as well as a chance to connect with hospice vendors and other hospice and palliative care professionals. Register early at calhospice.org to secure your spot at the conference, and be sure to say you heard about it on the Heart of Hospice podcast.
Another way that people are misinformed is they are just unaware of the assistance that they do qualify for.
Oh, this is true.
That's one of the reasons social workers in hospice on our interdisciplinary teams are so important, because they are able to connect people with the resources that they might qualify for, whether it's Medicaid, whether it's Meals on Wheels, maybe it's veterans benefits, things like that.
Sure. So here's what we know. As the disease trajectory continues, typically the caregiving role just continues to grow.
Yes.
The person needs more and more care, and then the expenses begin to accumulate because maybe the caregiver can no longer work and they need more, or the person, the ill person, needs more medical assistance, and the costs just begin to mount. And then what happens if there's an acute event?
There's no time to plan.
Right.
Maybe people with serious illness or the caregiver themselves might not have been in the greatest financial shape before they even get to the illness part.
Right. And so it just begins to snowball at that point. A study conducted by AARP in 2016 surveyed nearly 2,000 family caregivers. The study represented a variety of races and ethnicities, and it asked them to track their expenditures. Here's what the study found. Family caregivers spent an average of nearly $7,000 a year of their own money, not the ill person's money, but their money out of their own pocket for things like medical needs and personal care expenses and education and travel and legal fees, or paying for help when they couldn't do it themselves.
So that's $7,000 a year in 2016.
In 2016 dollars, yes.
You're right. I can imagine it's quite a bit more than that now.
I would think it would be, yes.
So
Yes.
all that doom and gloom, it's good to know, to be informed, right? You can't craft a fix if you don't know what the problem is. So let's talk about things you should consider as a potential caregiver or a person with a serious illness or a chronic illness. These are some things that we would suggest you consider. First of all, consider the financial status of both the caregiver or caregivers. There might be multiple if you're lucky enough to have a village, as well as the person who's going to be receiving the care. Because a lot of times there's not enough financial stability or financial strength just from the person who needs the care. You also have to include the caregiver's finances. So it takes everybody's money to make the whole thing successful.
Right. Just like the study that we just read about, these people are paying out of their own pocket. And so it is going to take some consideration of everyone's financial status. So we also need to consider a very realistic view of sustainability. How long can you afford to provide care?
So when you think that I think the average cost of nursing home stay per month is somewhere between $5,000 and $7,000.
Or more, yes.
Depending on where you are in the country, that kind of thing. So let's say $7,000. And then you multiply that by a year and you figure out how much that is. And then you multiply that by 3 years. What is life expectancy? It depends on the individual and where you are. And when you start adding that up, how long can you afford to do that is what it comes down to.
Yeah, all of a sudden we're talking big bucks here.
Big bucks.
We also need to consider how the caregiving role will affect the caregiver's job. And it does. Will they be able to work part-time? Do they need to move from a full-time position down to a part-time position so that they can continue to provide care for their loved one? And that's going to affect their ability to earn. So not only do expenses go up, but sometimes income also goes down.
Right. If you work in an industry where, like hospice, where you take on-call responsibilities, you have an on-call job where you might be called out abruptly, it's very difficult to be a caregiver in your personal life and then be able to just stop and set that aside anytime you needed to go out to make a call for your work.
And what if you're trying to be a caregiver long distance? We call this long distance caregiving, and it's true. Well, there will probably be several times during a year when you will need to travel back to where your person is that you're caring for. And that's going to mean travel costs, whether it's an airline ticket or whether it's just the cost of traveling by car. It's still going to cost a lot of money to travel back and forth for that distance. Even if it's just an hour and a half away, if you do that enough times during the year, and those costs begin to mount up.
Well, if you think about this too, Jerry, you have to factor in the possibility as the disease trajectory moves forward, relocation might be a choice that you have to make. Can you financially afford a move? And if you have to move, is there a job there for you?
Yeah, this is true.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider when it comes to distance, where you're caregiving from, right. If you're a remote caregiver or a local caregiver.
So one of the things that we would encourage you to take into consideration is what resources are available. Don't think that you have to do this on your own. Look and research, see if there are some resources that are available. And then how long will those resources be accessible to you? Because sometimes they reach an end if your loved one in that disease trajectory reaches a certain point, then that resource might not be something they qualify for any longer. So what we would invite you to do, recommend that you do, is talk to professionals, social workers, elder law attorneys, and financial advisors. Find out as much information as you can.
You know, AARP is a really good resource in this particular case. They've got lots of support there, a lot of articles that you can access. And I think being proactive, if you have the luxury of time, is a huge help in this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So by all means, talk to the people who have the experience and the knowledge, and it will make things so much easier and so much better for you if you do.
Thanks for listening to Heartbeat from the Heart of Hospice. I'm Helen Bauer with Jerry Fenter. Because we know your hospice journey is 24/7, you can always find us at theheartofhospice.com. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, and please take a minute to leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts.
If you would like to connect with us, you can always send us an email to host@theheartofhospice.com. And you can also find us on any of the social media platforms. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.